Welcome to our podcast. This is Friends on Fire.
I'm Mike. I'm a lifelong devotee of financial independence. I even wrote a book about it.
And I'm Maggie, a newer convert, but just as passionate, especially on the intersection of minimalism and financial independence.
We're one and the same.
We are two like-minded friends who believe that talking about money with your friends and family opens the door to financial well-being.
The Friends on Fire podcast is about dispelling myths, building financial acumen, and sharing your financial independence journey with the people you care about.
This is Friends on Fire. Hey, Maggie.
Hey, Mike.
How's it going?
Doing good.
So we have another early morning recording session.
Yeah, that's why I have a big grin on my face, because I was just telling you I wanted like a pat on the back for being like on time with all my stuff hooked up, etc. And then you were like, congratulations on being a functioning adult. And I was like,
Yes.
Thanks. I expected more fanfare for I've set the bar so low historically that just meeting my obligations means I need some compliments and positive feedback.
I am proud of you, Maggie.
Thanks.
We have an exciting episode today, and we are going to start with a voicemail from a listener that kicked this off and made us realize that we have yet to cover a pretty significant part of the personal finance experience for most people, which is home buying.
Yeah, it's funny. We've talked about rentals. We've talked about if you should pay off your mortgage, but we've not taken like 8 steps back to talk about like buying your first home and what that looks like and if you should do it. And
yeah, and this is why it's important and helpful for us to hear from you guys, because we're just talking about whatever we think is interesting and helpful, but we want to know what you guys want to hear about, and we will share our advice. So let's play this voicemail, Maggie.
Hey, Michael and Maggie. I am trying to figure out whether to buy a home or rent an apartment, and we could really use your advice. Everyone keeps telling me that I should take advantage of the low interest rates and that now is the best time to purchase a home in my entire lifetime, which is kind of terrifying. However, when I'm looking at the market and what's available, it's mostly, smaller townhomes. Pretty much all the single family homes have been snatched up. There's not really a lot out there, even for what is there. So the market seems pretty frothy and like it's reaching a peak. And I had always been taught not to buy high, so seems kind of at odds with the advice as well. And I'm just trying to figure out the pros and the cons of the situation. Some other pieces of information towards it. I have enough for a 20% down payment and would have someone who would be probably renting from me as well as a roommate, assuming that I find a home in the right area that would be convenient for us. So thanks in advance for any advice that you can give on how to make this complicated decision.
All right, that was a great question. And first of all, the term frothy, not usually used in...
That was the number one thing I picked up. I literally wrote down 2 notes.
Yeah.
One of them was frothy and the other one was about timing the market. But go ahead. Let's talk about frothy.
I've not heard this in the personal finance space before, but I think I'm going to start using it all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I just Googled frothy because I wanted to know like the formal definition of it. It is full of or covered with a mass of small bubbles, light and entertaining, but of little substance, which is that's the way she meant it. Right. Mm-hmm. So is there true substance to what's going on in the market right now that makes her right? You think that's...
Yeah, I think I'm not sure, but okay. I love it. And I'm going to, regardless of how it's actually supposed to be used, I'm going to start using it in my day-to-day business talk.
Yeah.
Do you think I can make it catch on at work?
I think you can. I think when you're talking about finance topics, you can talk about certain things of little substance, which is, I think, how you should use it, that are like frothy. Yeah. Like when I'm asking about like a $10 expense and something to you, and you're like my $2 Uber scooter rides that you used to give me a hard time about.
Oh my God.
Like that's just frothy. I don't think we know how to use the word frothy. This is like we're going to get back to the topic in a second.
What was the topic?
My 6th grader, housing, and her voicemail. My 6th grader uses the word oof. Have you heard that word?
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's like trending right now. And my favorite thing to do right now is to use it wrong. So I just say it to her all the time now. Like something will happen and it's not the proper, I know how to properly use the word oof, but instead I just, because she thinks I'm lame already, am like, every time something, I'll like, something exciting will happen and I'll be like, oof. Oof. And I just, after like 10 times a day, I say oof to her and she just like rolls her eyes at me and it kind of makes her laugh, which is why I keep doing it. But I'm going to do that with frothy in you now. I'm just going to like throw frothy in when it's not even necessarily the appropriate use of frothy.
Yeah. Can we have a frothy amortization of this expense, please?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. We can do that.
Like, let's get frothy back on topic. Let's get this frothy. Let's make this episode frothy again. Okay. We're not making fun of you, by the way, for the use. We actually liked the use of the word frothy. We're now going to misuse it.
Yes. In your honor.
But you have a very nice vocabulary.
And maybe you could call back in and explain to us how you're supposed to appropriately use it, because apparently we don't know. All right. So home buying. This is going to be a pretty frothy episode. I'm sorry, I should stop. So we're actually going to break this into 2 episodes because we think there is a lot of information to cover and we don't want to overwhelm you guys and give you the ability to pick the area of home buying advice that is of most interest to you. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something that I am passionate about. And the first thing that I tell people when they are considering buying a home, it is a lifestyle decision. It is not an investment decision. There's the industry and all the associated industries around home buying that want to make you believe it is a wise investment decision, that it's the right thing to do for your personal finances, for your family, for your security in the future. But it's really like 2 totally different things. Buying a home, I think, can be one of the best decisions of your life. I mean, the home I live in certainly was the best purchase I've ever made in my entire life, even though it's cost me a lot of money. Better
than the 2003 Ford Explorer?
Oh, that's, ooh.
See? Toss up there, right?
Yeah, it's a toss up. The house was much more expensive than the 2003
And as we'll get
Ford
into
Explorer.
Later, not as productive of a purchase. Well, actually, in terms of lifestyle, it is, but okay.
I've been happy about it every day that I've lived here. And I bought this house in 2012. And so I think the first thing that we'd recommend doing for this listener and for everybody is just change your frame of reference. What is going to make you happy? What is going to give you a satisfying life? What's going to make you feel safe and comfortable? Start your home buying decision that way. And then let's talk about the finances in a little bit.
Yeah. And Mike, one thing that I want to kind of double click on that you said is it's a lifestyle decision. So I think that is such an important point. And just like all lifestyle decisions, that can get overwhelmed or sort of infiltrated with keeping up with the Joneses and lifestyle inflation and other things that impact your lifestyle decisions that aren't always necessarily what you want. And so you got to really be cautious. And we'll talk about this more, but that you're buying a home for the right reason. And because we're going to get into this today on, just the idea of people think they often feel a lot of pressure to buy their first home versus keep renting, or they think they're throwing money away when they're renting and all these things. And we're going to kind of get into how that's not always true today. Mm-hmm. And I think that lifestyle point is so critical because that can often be one of the reasons people think they need to buy a home. And then it also can be that, that they think it's the right investment and, they think it's a financial decision they should be making, which we'll get into also.
When we talk about lifestyle, the non-financial reasons that you would buy a house or pick a particular house over another could be a bunch of different things. And so we're going to run through a quick list. And I think all of these are going to apply to people. Certainly most of them are going to apply to people, but you should think about each one when you are deciding to buy a house or where to buy a house. First one, safety. How safe do you feel in your neighborhood at night, in your house by yourself? Those are going to be important for people.
I think also schools is a big one. So there's obviously a lot of people that want to be in a certain school district. I could go off on a whole soapbox about schools for what it's worth, because I think people always think they need to be in some 9 or 10 out of 10 school ranking school, which is I think the schools in my district are rated like 5 out of 10 on those little rating systems, which are based on test scores and all sorts of things. Like there's a high ESL, English as a second language population in our school district, and that brings the test scores down. Doesn't mean it's a great school, it's a great community, it's a very diverse community, which I want for my children. And so I think that's even just an interesting point on schools, is like people do it for schools, but don't get overly hung up on the scores of schools. Go and look at the community and the involvement of the parents and other things like that.
I like how you're like, I could get on a whole soapbox about this.
But then, then I'm like, I'm going to.
Now.
That was my mini soapbox. I could do a whole episode of my big soapbox. That was a brief soapbox. You're welcome. We can move on now.
Let's move on. I think another one is going to be the aesthetic beauty of the place. Do you want a place that's surrounded by trees, and do you want a garden? Do you want a lawn? Like that is going
sidewalks.
Sidewalks. Like this is actually a really important thing. You want to look out your window and like what you see, because you're going to see it all day, every day, especially now because we're working from home.
Yeah.
Another one is going to be space. How much space do you really need? If you buy a house like a townhouse and you have a shared wall, or you buy a house in a cluster community where you don't have a yard and you're only separated by a few feet, that could be what you want. Or you could want 100 yards in between each house, or a mile in between each house.
Yeah.
That's going to be an important lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that yard and having, privacy, I think to me kind of goes with that space also. And along with privacy is just the quietness, right? Like you certainly get a lot more peace and quiet when you're in a house versus when you're in an apartment or in a condo or a shared wall space. And I'll forget about this until I travel sometimes and realize like, oh, wow, when there's someone right next to you, you hear stuff, and it's just not quite as quiet as when you're in your own home.
Another big one is going to be the proximity to things of importance. If you like walking to restaurants, if you like walking around the park.
I thought you meant like an Aldi, Mike. Like how close are you to an Aldi?
Oh, well, I think they are popping up everywhere, so that shouldn't be a problem for people. Proximity to public transportation. So this is also going to be a big part of your lifestyle decision. How close are you to the things that you want to spend your time doing?
I think there's also that sort of intangible thing of having it be yours, and you could do what you want to it. You can make renovations, you can make improvements. This, just that, again, intangible feelings. Mike, I know you like to talk about your feelings of,
every day.
This is mine. I own it. Now, there's a lot of stress that comes with those feelings, right? Which we'll talk about in a minute. A lot of stress and responsibility of having it truly be, quote, yours. But a lot of people love that. Like, Mike, you love doing renovations and DIY stuff. And so do I when I have the time. And it's hard to want to do that stuff when it's not your property, because you're sort of investing and helping in something that you don't get the payoff for.
And then kind of to piggyback on that last point, because HGTV is such a huge part of our culture right now, the ability to actually renovate a space, to do a big project, is extremely appealing to people. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the costs of those things. But if you like the idea of a project, if you like the idea of like building out a completely new space that is just for you based on your vision, then that is kind of a lifestyle choice as well.
Very true. So again, I think it's worth like wrapping up these points and what we said earlier, which is, just the idea of keeping up with the Joneses and lifestyle inflation. Like, don't pick any of these things because you're trying to impress somebody else, right? Pick them because they're truly what you need. So, if you have 2 kids and you don't plan on having any more, you don't need a, 4,000 or 5,000 square foot house and 8 bedrooms and more bathrooms than you have people in your family, unless you have like, in-laws staying with you frequently. You know what I mean? Like, think about your actual life and what you need, and don't buy more than you need. Make sure you're doing it for your lifestyle, not for somebody else's, and take some time to be introspective on what you truly even want. Cause it takes time to unpack even me saying, do what you want, not what you think other people are going to expect you to do, or what will impress your parents or your family or whatever, the community. It takes time to even unpack that, right? And to think about like, well, what really matters to me? Because for so long, what matters to you is ingrained in what matters to other people and what other people around you are doing. So that's not going to just be a magical thing that you unpack and change overnight. Take some time to truly think about what you need and what you value.
That's totally right, Maggie. It's your lifestyle that's important. And so hopefully the listener has some idea about what she really wants out of a home. we won't be able to really help her with that. But let's start addressing some of the other questions she had. She mentioned the market, the frothy market, and interest rates being as low. I think she's getting advice that says like, this is the best time in your lifetime to buy a house. And just for some perspective, interest rates are just as low as they were in 2012 when I bought this house. Same interest rates. They're not really going anywhere. And I think this is by design, because when you raise interest rates, it makes it harder to borrow money. People buy less homes. The economy suffers. Interest rates are going to stay low.
Well, and buying a house just because interest rates are low is like, I mean, it's a much bigger decision, obviously, but it's like buying a shirt just because it's on sale, right? It's not a good reason. I like
that.
You like
That's
it?
nice, Maggie. Yes.
I mean, obviously, I'm
perfect.
comparing like a $10 purchase to a, $400,000 purchase, but it's the same principle. You don't buy something just because it's on sale. It's not a great path to go down, unless you're like an investor or something else, which again is not the point when we're talking about buying a home for you.
One of the things that is a recurring theme on this show is the economic incentive of the messages that you are receiving about things to buy. And so I think it's important to call out that when you are hearing things like, now's the best time to buy a house, interest rates are super low, these messages are being driven by the mortgage industry. And you might be hearing it from friends or family, but they are hearing it from the mortgage industry. They want you to buy houses. They want you to take out loans. This is how they make money. They are extremely incentivized to spend a lot of money to put this message out in the market. So take everything you hear with a grain of salt when it comes to buying something.
I told you I wrote down 2 notes when she was leaving the voicemail. One was frothy and the second one was timing, right? So what you're talking about, and it's interesting because I just looked at a rental property yesterday and I was talking to my realtor about, I was like, I really don't want to buy like at the peak of this little bubble we're in. Like prices are really high. They're not on my side right now as a buyer, right? It's a seller's market, particularly in the area I'm in, like things are just flying off. Mm-hmm. Anyways, his comment to me was, he was like, you can't time the market, right? Just like you can't time the stock market. Like you shouldn't be thinking that way necessarily. You should think like, does this fit into your portfolio? Do the numbers work out for you? And I thought that was an interesting reminder and point. And it's right. Like, you shouldn't make your home buying decisions because you're trying to like time the market or time when interest rates are low. Certainly if interest rates are low and you want to refinance, like take advantage of it, but don't make a decision specifically around that, because at that point you are trying to time the market. And there's a lot of research and support and historical data that supports you're not going to win by trying to time the market. Like you just can't time it.
That's exactly right. So let's talk about how interest rates work, and specifically mortgages. When we talk about an interest rate, that is the percentage fee that you are going to pay on the balance you still owe to the bank. In order to buy a house, you have to first put some skin in the game with a down payment. Typically, this is 20%. Then the bank lends you 80% of the home value, and then you go and buy that house. Now, if you put down less than 20%, just on a side note, but it's important, you're going to have PMI, which is private mortgage insurance, because the bank is going to consider you too risky of an investment to fund any more than 80%. And so the PMI is going to be an additional fee on the mortgage balance, basically like less than 1%, but these numbers add up.
PMI is such a drag.
Yeah.
It's really something you should avoid like at all costs.
Just jumping forward to some of our advice. If you don't have 20% for a down payment, you're not ready to buy a house.
And the bank is trying to tell you that with things like PMI. They're not willing to give you a mortgage, basically. They're going to make you pay this extra premium because you really can't afford to buy a house, is what they're telling you.
Yeah.
You're risky.
Now, the caller did say she had 20%, which is great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So congratulations. But for everybody who doesn't, just keep this in mind. We would really discourage you guys from getting a loan with less than 20% down payment.
And Mike, I think it's important, and we'll talk more about some of our personal stories, but just on this point of me saying like you should really avoid PMI. I've paid PMI 2 different times in my life on 2 different mortgages. So I'm going to be clear, like I'm not perfect. And we're giving you advice of what we think you should do and what we've learned. I know, Mike, that you've never paid PMI. I could just look at you and tell. But I'm I just want people to know, like, as we say these things, sometimes I'm like, I wonder if I sound like a hypocrite. I'm telling you the advice I wish someone had given me 10, 20 years ago, right? Which is that was such a waste of money. And I was in such a hurry to own a home for all sorts of these reasons of just like, I thought it's what people did. Right. And I went and bought homes that I didn't have enough money to put down on, and it worked out longer term, but it was not it didn't work out from like an investment standpoint, but it wasn't a good decision. And if I could go back and redo it again, I would. So I just think that's an important disclaimer.
So when you have this mortgage payment, you owe 80%, let's say, to the bank, and then each month you pay a fixed amount. And this is going to be a combination of interest and principal. Principal goes to pay down that mortgage balance. Interest is what you owe on the outstanding amount.
Mike, just so for people who really don't understand how mortgages work, we're not going to get into this, but also they often will roll your homeowner's insurance and your property taxes into like an escrow account. A lot of mortgage companies kind of require that, at least in the first year. And so that's another part of your payment, but we're really just going to focus on like our point here, which is more around the principal and the interest.
Now, when you are paying interest back, even though everybody's telling you, oh, interest rates are super low, best time in your lifetime to go buy, this is still super expensive. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. And luckily I had all these charts in my book. And so instead of like recalculating all this stuff, I went and like grabbed screenshots.
I didn't realize that chart in there was from your book. Nice.
Yeah, saves me some time. So we're going to talk about two different examples. The first is a 30-year loan for a $500,000 mortgage. Super expensive, but I wanted to illustrate the point. Interest rate of 5%. Your payment of just interest and principal is going to be $2,684 a month. Of that amount, $2,083 is just interest. The remainder, $601, is going to be paid towards the principal. So if you owe $500,000, the next month you would owe $500,000 less $601 because that is what you paid down. This is your first payment. Over time, it changes. So your interest will go down, your principal amount will go up, but the total payment will always remain the same. Now, on a 15-year loan, so a shorter time frame, you would also get a lower interest rate because it is a little less risky for the bank. Let's call it 4.5%. You would pay a much larger amount, $38.25, but your interest would go down to $18.75, and your first month's principal would go up to $19.50. So you're paying less in interest, but much more in principal because you're paying this off faster. That was a lot of numbers. I think the primary call out is just that interest is going to make up a huge portion of your payment for the first part of your mortgage. If you borrow for a long time, you're going to pay more interest over time, but less cash each month. And I think people get confused with the idea that having a low mortgage payment is a great deal because yes, you are paying less cash out of your pocket, but your quote unquote cost over time is going to be huge. And so a shorter loan is going to be the opposite. You pay much more cash, but then your cost, your expense, what hits your net worth is going to be lower.
Mike, what is your view on, because I actually had somebody ask me this question the other day. What is your view on getting a longer mortgage as a safety net, even though the rate, like you said, on a 15 versus a 30 year, the rate's going to be a little bit higher on a 30 year, taking the higher mortgage to have a little bit of a safety net again, but aggressively paying off extra principal, which will reduce the length of your, mortgage and your interest payments over time.
I'm not sure why you would bother.
Well, here's why. So in this case, this particular person, it was a little bit of a stretch to make that payment every month, that higher payment that is forced on the 15-year versus optional on the 30-year. So, and they were, they were worried like, well, if somebody lost their job, if one of the two, people in this household lost their job, it would be a struggle and they could fall behind on their mortgage payments.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I think in that case, if money was so tight on a mortgage payment, then it was probably not
It was tight on the 15-year, to be clear. It wasn't tight on the 30-year at all.
Yeah. The difference is not going to be that big between the two. And so for a new home buyer, if that extra amount from a 15-year compared to a 30-year is going to mean, like, if you lose your job, I guess if you lose your job, you're in big trouble anyway. But if you have an
emergency fund, but if
your total spend is so tight that doesn't work, I would say that you're probably not ready to buy the home, or you're buying a more expensive home than you need. For somebody who already has a home.
But yeah, this was a refi.
Yeah. I think you could just refi it later. I mean, it depends on what the interest rate.
The rates were both very low, and it was like, a little bit lower on the 15-year, obviously. And I was like, look, you're already getting they were getting like 2.5% on a 30-year, or maybe it was a 20-year, whatever it was, but it was longer than 15 years. And I was like, I would just take that, but aggressively pay it off and commit. Because the tough thing is when you got to know if you're disciplined to actually pay extra. If you're going to be like, oh, well, I don't really have to, I'm not going to.
This is a tough question. I think it depends a lot on the person's specific situation. And it goes back to the episode we recorded about why paying off your mortgage is a great investment.
Yeah.
And the key takeaway from that one was it depends on your overall composition of your net worth. If you are very heavily invested in the market, paying off your mortgage is a good, stable return on investment. If you are over-indexed in real estate, you probably don't. You would want to use extra cash and put it in the market and rebalance yourself. We're getting a little bit off topic, though.
Back on topic. Sorry.
All right.
Okay, so let's talk about how much you should spend, right? And I think a really important point here is don't trust the bank. They don't have your best interests in mind. They are not focused on, they're just not focused on what's best for you. They're focused on what is the least risk for them, right? But they don't care about your lifestyle. They don't care about your goals. They don't know what your personal finance goals are longer term. They want you to borrow as much money as possible, as much money as they're legally allowed to give you. Because if you remember, pre-2008, they were allowed to give you a lot more. There's a lot more regulations now on how much they're allowed to give you. So they're only giving you less because they're regulated to give you less, but they're still going to give you as much as they could possibly give you. So just because they approve you for X amount, so let's use if they approve you for a $500,000 loan, it does not mean you have to spend $500,000, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get hung up on that. They're like, okay, well, my budget is now the max of what I've been approved to spend by the bank.
Yeah. The one thing that drives me crazy about home buying TV shows is they always use terms like, well, let's go figure out how much home you can afford. The bank doesn't give a shit about you. Yeah. They are not your financial advisor. They don't have your long-term plans in mind. They want to make money off you.
Also, the bank doesn't know if you have an emergency fund set up, right? The bank doesn't know if you're living paycheck to paycheck, right? They're going to give you exactly what you can afford if you keep that job that you're in right now. But they're not worried about what's going to happen if you lose your job in 6 months. Mm-hmm. That's when the bank will come and take your house just as quickly as they gave you a loan for something.
In addition to the borrowing costs, you're going to have taxes, maintenance, repairs, renovations. You're going to need new furniture because you're probably buying a bigger place. You have to get art for the walls. You need towels to match the tile. You need curtains.
Okay, you don't need all that stuff, but I get your point, Mike.
Yeah. So it is hard to control these urges to fill your space with stuff that matches the aesthetic of the house, which is likely different than the house you're moving from or the apartment you're moving from. It is so damn expensive to own a home. We really cannot stress this enough. This is not a good investment. It is expensive.
And then you're going to have a pipe burst or something you didn't plan on. And that is not, you're going to be, I know you're excited to do renovations and, make your own things look beautiful in your home. That's great. That's one area you're going to spend money on. But then there's all the things you didn't want to do, which is a tree limb hit your roof and now you got to pay for a roof repair. And
those are the worst types of expenses. I know. Where it's just or even if something you don't even see, like a pipe burst underground, and you're I don't even have the pleasure of seeing this being fixed. Somebody's going to come and dig it up and fix it, and it's going to cost me $10,000.
Instead, they're just going to tear your yard up and give you a bill.
These are all the costs. Now, true, you will make some money on the property, most likely.
You might make some money on the property.
Yes. I mean, real estate is a pretty reliable investment. So the value of your home is going to go up, but we're going to talk through some specifics about how that kind of gets eaten up entirely and sometimes more than what you've made just with the other expenses. We love giving some specifics about our lives. And so we did some math. I'm going to share with you some real numbers. Okay. I bought my house in 2012 for $470,000. I put,
Woo, you're a high roller. Keep going.
I put 160 down, which was 34%. I don't know exactly why I landed on this number, but I think I was getting a better interest rate. I also got a 15-year loan. Now, I paid off my mortgage in 7 years, but in that time, I paid $57,000 in interest. I also paid about $50,000 in taxes, $10,000 in insurance.
To be clear, you're adding up like 10 years of those costs as an estimate.
Yeah, 8 years.
I was just estimating. You're right. 8 years.
Yeah. So from 2012 to
I just don't want people to think they're
2020.
like, why are you paying $10,000 in insurance? That's like, you're paying $1,000 a year.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And then I also paid looking at this number, it seems crazy now, $119,000 in renovations and repairs, which were lifestyle decisions, not really investment decisions, but we got the house to where we love living in it every single
And
day.
that stuff adds up. Like, I don't think you fully knew you spent $120,000 on repairs until you went and added up like, well, there was the new roof and then there was this. Like, that stuff adds up over the years. It's in smaller little increments, big chunks, and it can add up.
Now, when you look at what I paid and what it's worth, I think the house is probably worth $580 conservatively, maybe $600. And you're like, wow, I made $110,000 on this house. And I think that's the way most people will look at that. But when you add in the costs, it's actually a huge net loss of $125,000 or $15,000 a year. So my cost to live here, my lifestyle decision cost is $15,000 a year. It is not a profit of $110,000. So like I said, lifestyle choice, not an investment choice.
I'll give an abbreviated version, if that's possible, of my house numbers, just to give examples. I bought my house over 10 years ago. I can't even remember what year now, which is crazy. Maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago. And I bought it for $415,000. They shouldn't have given us that money. I mean, we had reliable jobs, but like we could barely afford the mortgage payment at the time. It was a very old house. It needed a lot of work. We did a lot of the work ourselves, put money into that. And then it's hard for me to go through this without giving you like my life story.
You just
my dad no, I have to give to give the context. So my dad died. I had this moment where I was like, life's short. My dad died with, having a, fairly frugal life and not getting to spend money on a lot of the things he wanted to do throughout his life because he didn't have a lot of it at times, but also he was sort of, trying to protect it for the future. And then he wasn't able to use it in the future. So I had this moment where I was like, what am I, there's a bunch of things that would make this house better for us. Again, it's a very old house. It had this like tiny galley kitchen, just a bunch of things that were like not helpful functionally every day in our house. And I was like, I want to build the house I want to live in 10 years from now. I don't want to wait for 10 years. I want to do it now and I'll just figure it out later. And so I borrowed about half the money for a big remodel and I put in about half the money for my own money. And I did like a $200,000 remodel. We fully rebuilt the whole house. So, which happens a lot in like the particular neighborhood I'm in because the houses are old. We redid all the electrical. I mean, we didn't have like grounded electrical. We redid all the electrical, all the plumbing, everything, right? Like new insulation, changed the roof, like vaulted the ceiling. There were really low ceilings in the basement. So all this stuff that we did to make it just like more livable, more enjoyable. And, so even just with that, I'm $615,000 in. And then you add, at times we did like a new roof. We put this ridiculously beautiful and whimsical treehouse that my kids never use, cool. Which was another like moment I had kind of related to my dad dying of, he built us this amazing treehouse when we were a kid and we used it sometimes, but I just love the idea of it. And so I wanted to do that for my kids and it looks beautiful and other people are very impressed by it, but my own kids rarely play in it. I will say I kind of regret that decision. Anyways, We put a lot of money into it. Probably easily another like 40,000 and like a new roof, new HVAC, this, tree house, just other big renovation projects that we've done over the years. And then I'm not even adding up how much I paid in interest and taxes and all of that. My house is maybe worth somewhere between 650 to 700 now, but I've more than put that into it, plus paid a ton of interest. So I'm technically, I've in no way profited if I sell this house tomorrow.
That was so much context.
That was a lot of context.
Maggie, yeah. let's do a quick little exercise. Okay. I have the mortgage calculator that we built that's on Etsy. Super helpful tool.
It is very helpful.
You put how much down? 20%?
On that house? No, I paid PMI for a really long time. I didn't have 20% to put down at the time. Actually, you know what? I don't know what sort of financial decisions I was making at the time.
Oh my God. You just got to help me with the numbers. How much did you put down?
I don't know. 10%? I think we put down like 10% maybe.
Okay, 10%. What was your interest rate including
How would someone know this stuff that far later? I have no idea. It was like 5% maybe?
5%. All right, let's just assume that it was 5%. When did you actually pay it off?
2 years ago, a year and a half ago. I knew you when I paid it off. I was 38 or 39.
Okay, let's call it 2019. Do you remember how much your final payment was?
When I paid it off?
Yeah.
Oh, I did a big chunk. I maybe paid off like 150 all at once that I'd saved up.
Okay, so this is going to be some rough numbers based on the calculator. In the calculator, you can actually go into the monthly view and see this stuff specifically. But like roughly, if you were to keep that loan for 30 years on a $415,000 house, you would have paid $348,000 in interest over 30 years. That is
what's crazy. No one ever looks at this when they like are going through with the lending process, but they'll give you a table of like what you're going to pay in interest over the next 15, 30 years.
Now, let's say you bought this house in 2005. In those 15 years, you still paid almost $250,000 in interest.
That's a lot of money. I'm definitely underwater on this house.
That's right.
Now, look, for someone who's going to remind us, like, well, if we compare this to putting the money in the stock market, like, I get it. We're making a point here. Our point, in case someone's getting lost in all the numbers here, our point is the personal home that you live in. It's different if you're trying to do like house hacking or other things. We have a great episode on that if you want to listen to it. But the personal home that you live in with your family and that you're raising children in or fur babies, as some people call them, of their pets, that often is a lifestyle decision. It is not an investment decision. That is the only point we're trying to make here. And so know that going in and go in eyes wide open about this lifestyle decision that you're deciding to make. Because people think that renting is often, it has some like negative connotations at times. They think they're supposed to buy a house, all this stuff. But even as a property owner of rental properties, you look at what renters, like they're not having, I know how much I'm paying in like property tax. I'm paying like $400 to $500 a month in property taxes that they're not having to pay. They're not having to worry about any repairs or damage to the property, right? They live mindset wise, they live a life of mindset luxury where they're not having to worry about that property. So there's a lot of benefits to renting, right? If you can get in the right situation. And again, we're not pro rent. We're just saying you really need to go into these decisions thoughtfully and not be pressured by what someone's telling you to do or what everybody else is doing. There's no shame in renting. Sometimes it actually can be very financially advantageous, especially if you like move a lot and you're not going to stay in one area for too long. And there's a lot of reasons why somebody might actually want to rent versus thinking that they have to buy a house.
Those are all great points. And I think we should wrap up part 1 of this 2-part episode with a quote that I really like. And next week, we're going to talk about some of the more specifics about like how you actually go and get a loan and buy a house and what you should do. But the quote is, whether you own a home or plan to buy a home, it's better to look at the asset in terms of cost reduction, not future gains. You should be asking yourself, how can I buy and maintain this home for as little as possible? Do you know where that's from, Maggie?
I didn't, but I just decided it might be from your book.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, look at that.
Has a nice ring to it.
I heard those words and I was like, that sounds like something Mike would say.
Yeah, this is a very Mike type freeze. All right, let's give our top 3 takeaways, and then we will leave you guys hanging for the meat of the house buying advice for next week. Number 1, it is a lifestyle choice, not an investment choice to buy a house.
Number 2, buy a home for the right reasons. And for any bachelorette fans out there, I just want you to recognize the right reasons reference, right? Right reasons police. Make sure you're here for the right reasons.
I'm not sure I have ever seen that.
That's okay. Keep going. Somebody's going to appreciate my right reasons reference. Buy a home for the right reasons.
Number 3, you guys heard this with the examples that Maggie and I gave. You should expect to spend a ton of money over time. But if you pick a house for the right reasons that are true to you, you won't regret it. So next week, we're going to get into some more tactical advice on how you go and pick the right home. We talked about lifestyle. We've talked about some of the costs you're going to incur. And the listeners probably listening to this and thinking like, well, that was super. You basically got me no closer to buying a home or renting than I was before. We're going to take you through some more tactical steps and what you need to look out for to make the right decision.
Okay, so we'll run through some tactical advice for the home buying process if you're ready to buy a home.
Thanks everybody for listening. If you've been challenged or inspired by what you've heard today, please rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.
If you have thoughts or questions, we would love to hear from you, and you can leave us a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370, or you can hit us up on Instagram or Facebook. Okay, well, enjoy the discussion, Mike. I hope you have an awesome day. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye, Maggie.
Bye.